Welsh depth chart for the Rugby World Cup 2023, folks. The continuing depth chart series for Rugby World Cup teams. We're having a look to see across this entire World Cup cycle how much depth has been built in each position. Which guys who've been playing in that cycle are heading to the World Cup. We've looked at South Africa and New Zealand and England and Scotland. And there tends to be a trend that the Southern Hemisphere teams don't have as much chopping and changing, at least the ones compared to the teams who are involved in Lions tours. Lions tours are a little bit disruptive in terms of your kind of regular team cycle, but also changing your coach is also pretty disruptive. Australia's depth chart looks a lot messier than New Zealand's because they changed their coach. Likewise, Wales. Your depth chart is pretty messy. You changed your coach and you had a Lions tour to deal with. So, yes. Let us have a look at the depth by position, the omissions in the top 15. Here is the depth by position. Each colour represents a player and how much of the game time they had in their particular position. Some of them stand out to me. Number 6 stands out not in a great way in that you've used goodness gracious knows how many players. A lot. Number 6 has not been a regular starting position for any one player throughout this Rugby World Cup cycle. Number 8 is a lot more stable. The front row actually looks pretty nice. Chunk of green, chunk of blue, chunk of yellow. First choice, second choice, third choice guys are all getting a bit of game time. Some of the positions are around about half of the game time. Number 10. Fullback's not quite half. But yeah. You have to keep in mind that guys like number 1, your number 1 guy, Wyn Jones, he's not in the squad. Number 2, your first choice guy, Ken Owens, he's not in the squad. Number 5, Alan Wyn Jones, he's not in the squad. Number 7, Justin Tipuric, he's not in the squad. So all those green chunks from those few positions, they're not going to the World Cup. So what we really need to do is switch from the overall squad to taking out the minutes of the guys who didn't play. So, if we start with the front row, 1, 2, and 3, you'll notice there's a lot more grey, especially positions 1 and 2. Less so with tight head prop 3. But Gareth Thomas is your number 1 guy for loosehead, followed by Nicky Smith and Corey Domachowski. So those 3 guys are going to the World Cup. Domachowski's only just come onto the scene relatively recently at international level, so that's why his chunk is kind of pretty small. Hooker is Ryan Elias, Elliot D, and Dewi Lake. Dewi Lake is interestingly co-captain, but you can see that slice of game time he had is remarkably small. And then tight head, Dylan Lewis, Tom Francis, and then Henry Thomas there as well. So who are the guys that we're missing? Well, like I mentioned, Wyn Jones, almost half the game time at loosehead, not quite half, 40%. And Ken Owens, not quite 40% of the game time, but well more than a third of the game time at 1 and 2. So a lot of game time has gone missing. The other guys are maybe a little less impactful in terms of how much time they took in each position that aren't going to the World Cup, but it still adds up. Guys like Reece Carey, Rob Evans, loosehead, Sam Perry, and Bradley Roberts, hookers, and then Leon Brown, Samson Lee, and others in the front row. So, in Dylan Lewis and Tom Francis, you've certainly got 2 of your kind of main guys who are going to the World Cup. Your third choice guys haven't had a lot of game time, but like I mentioned, Dewi Lake, clearly a lot of faith being shown in him, even if he's kind of relatively late into the piece. Locks, you've got a pretty similar story in those big chunks of game time being missing. One of them is Alan Wyn Jones, number 5. Like, he's had just under half of the game time tight head lock over the years, but he kind of called it quits from Welsh rugby just as the World Cup camp was getting together. So that big chunk is missing from number 5. The main guys you've got there's Will Rowlands, and he was your second guy, so he has to stand up to be the top guy now. And then Adam Baird. And then Adam Baird also appears on the other side, number 4, so he's the big chunk in green. He is your first choice guy. He is going to the World Cup. And then Dafford Jenkins. Will Rowlands also switched a little bit. And then you've got a few guys, those little slivers, are guys who have kind of filled in at lock where needs to be. Guys like Chiunza and Falatau and I think even Wainwright, like in a pinch, when there's a yellow card, Lock gets yellow card, need to shove a Lucy into the second row, that kind of thing, or end of game. The biggest omission, other than Alan Wynne-Jones, seems to be Ben Carter. His omission is a fair chunk of the game time. You've also had guys like Jake Ball, Corey Hill, Seb Davis. There's a fair few guys who've played some second row for Wales who've not made it. But with Adam Baird and Will Rollins, I still think you're not doing too bad. And then Jenkins emerging as a decent young prospect. Yeah, we'll see if Chiunza gets any game time in the second row. But from what Gats said, he's mainly looking at him as a Lucy. Speaking of Lucies, it gets pretty messy in the loose forwards. I mean, we saw that from when all the minutes were there. When you take out some of the minutes, it's still... Yeah, she's still a bit of a messy one. Number 6, who have you got here? Aaron Wainwright, green. Jack Morgan, blue. Dan Lydiate, yellow. Chiunza is there in purple. And then you've had other kind of fill-in guys who've not really been starting sixes like Rafael and Rollins every now and again. 7, Tane Basham. He's kind of your leading 7 candidate on the guys who've made the squad. Tommy Reffel and Jack Morgan. Jack Morgan, who's co-captain. So despite the fact that, like Dewi Lake, he's kind of a third choice guy in his position across the Rugby World Cup cycle. But as a kind of late emerger and co-captain, you would expect to see his minutes kind of increase pretty exponentially. Maybe not necessarily at 7, because they've got Basham and Reffel there as well, and Jack Morgan's pretty versatile, but that's where he is. 8 is sort of the most stable with Faletau there, that huge chunk of green, almost like 60% of the game time, followed by Wainwright, a bit of Basham, and a bit of Jack Morgan as well. So some of these guys are pretty versatile. But yeah, there's a heap of guys who've not made it. Justin Tipurick's the obvious one with like 40+% of the game time on the open side. And then so many guys who've had 10% or less of the game time across the cycle. Ross Moriarty, Josh Navidi, Alice Jenkins, Shane Lewis-Hughes, Turnbull, and then James Davis. Recently, Tane Plumtree, James Botham. Yeah, there's been a lot. Seb Davis as well. You've had a lot of guys in the back row for Wales. I always think you guys have got loads of back rows, and clearly you do because you've used all of them. Every man in Wales has had to go at the back row seemingly, but Faletau, if he's fit, you feel like he's going to be starting number 8 based on experience and the fact that he's not been kind of part of the old guard that's been that left. You know, he's still there, and then Jack Morgan has to be there as the co-captain plus whoever that's going to be. But yeah, it's been a bit of a revolving door. What can I say? Into the backs, I feel like a lot more stable in the backs than it has been in the forwards. Now, only 2 9s in the squad, as I sit here recording this. They haven't had any injuries. No one else has been called up or released. Thomas Williams and Gareth Davis. They've had, between the two of them, like 65% of the game time, so that's the majority. There is no third choice guy taken. That would have been the likes of a Kieran Hardy, Reece Webb, or even Lloyd Williams for a wee while. But Thomas Williams has been the main guy, and he makes it through. Likewise, number 10, Dan Biggers had well more than half the game time, so his going kind of makes absolute sense. But then Anscombe there with a small kind of blue slice, and then Sam Costello there with that little yellow piece. Much more limited, but at different ends of their career. Obviously, Anscombe's had a lot more test experience across the board. Just not that much in this cycle because he's been injured. And Sam Costello's kind of one of more recent emergences. But again, they've tried a lot of guys at 10. Callum Sheedy had a wee while where he was the first choice guy. Reece Priestland, Reece Patchell, Jared Evans. There's been a bunch of guys who've had goes at 10. But ultimately, Bigger is the veteran, is the experience, and is getting the most of the game time across the last, 3 and a bit years. 12 and 13, a little bit, one of the kind of areas where there's a few minutes going. I mean, you're mainly looking at the likes of Jonathan Davis at more the start of the Rugby World Cup cycle, and more recently Joe Hawkins. Those guys not making it means there's a bit of a hole in the number 12 jerseys. You're basically left with Nick Tompkins, who still had about a third of the game time as the leading candidate across the cycle, and then Johnny Williams. So those two guys are pretty much the only guys who've played in E12 who are in the squad. And then 13, George North, Nick Tompkins, Mason Grady, a bit of Josh Adams. Remember they tried him under Pivac. at centre for like I think one game. But Jonathan Davis, as part of that kind of older generation, the likes of Alan Wynne-Jones and Tipperick has kind of now left international rugby essentially. Halaholo has been in and out with injuries. Ben Thomas has had a go. Owen Watkins had a go. Max Llewellyn's had a go. There are still certainly guys on standby, more of the young guys than the kind of veterans waiting in the wings. But if it is just Tompkins and North, then that is kind of the two first choice guys who've made it through this cycle, depending on how Gats wants to go with things. Outside backs, all of your kind of main candidates are there. You're looking at left wing. You got Josh Adams, that big green slice, Rio Dyer, Lewis Rees-Zammit, and then like little bits of Liam Williams, George North kind of filling in towards the end of games. Right wing, Lewis Rees-Zammit, Josh Adams, George North, same names, isn't it? Just kind of switching from wing to wing. Liam Williams, I think even like Nick Tompkins has floated out to the wing every now and again. And then fullback, Liam Williams, Lee Halfpenny, that's your green and blue slices. Lewis Rees-Zammit seems to be that third choice guy who they can slot into fullback if needs be. And Skim and Bigger have dropped back to fullback every now and again. But yeah, all your kind of first choice guys across the cycle are there for Wales in that regard. I mean, the main guys who've missed out, Alex Cuthbert, Johnny McNichol coming as some of the more veteran guys. Owen Lane was there for a while. Hallam Amos obviously retired to follow his medical career. Jonah Holmes, Yohan Lloyd at fullback. Jared Evans has played. So yeah, there's been a few guys tried, but for the outside backs, I think those are the three positions where maybe the missing game time, the grey minutes, which have not flowed through the World Cup cycle through to the to the 33-man squad. Those are some of the kind of shallowest chunks. So the outside backs are actually looking pretty relatively stable. But yeah, I make it that Wales have used, I think, 95 players in this World Cup cycle, which is flippin' massive. Massive. More than England. England was in the 80s, and I thought that was a lot. Yeah, but just number 6 alone is a heap of players. So, as I said, Lions tour, disruptive in terms of building the stability, and then change of coach affects the stability, and then also for Wales, this pre-World Cup or post-Six Nations pre-World Cup clear out or retirements or whatever you want to call it has also meant that things have been really shifted up. So it's been messy. It's far from an ideal bit of prep for Wales, you'd have to say. I mean, the main omissions, which we've already gone over, but the main ones, Wynne-Jones, Ken Owens, Justin Tipperick, Alan Wynne-Jones, those are kind of your biggest guys, just purely in terms of game time. Jonathan Davis to a degree, Kieran Hardy, I guess, to a degree. And then a lot of guys who have been kind of bit part players who've been a little bit of a first choice for a while, but not managed to hold on to their spots, the likes of Reece Carey. Leon Brown for a while was either the starting guy or on the bench. There's been Seb Davis was in the squad consistently for a long time. Jake Ball for a while too. But yeah, for whatever reason, some guys it's injury, some guys it's retirement, some guys moved abroad. Joe Hawkins followed his career, ineligible for Wales anymore. So there's a variety of reasons why these guys have been omitted. But yeah, this is what we're left with. So the top 15 from the guys who are left, who've played the most game time in their position, it's Gareth Thomas, Ryan Elias, Dylan Lewis, front row. Remembering it would have been Wynne-Jones and Ken Owens in their positions if they'd been available. Adam Baird and Will Rowlands in the second row. Obviously, it would have been Alan Wynne based on game time, but for who we've got, it's those guys. And then 6, 7, 8, Wainwright, Basham, and Faletau. Realistically, we know it's going to be Jack Morgan because he is captain. Same with hooker. We know realistically it's going to be Dewey Lake. But you assume the co-captains are probably going to start. Maybe one starts, one's on the bench. Maybe Gats varies it up. But we know those guys are going to get more game time than is reflected in the game time they've gotten this World Cup cycle. 9 and 10 is going to be Thomas Williams and Dan Bigger. And that's been what it has been this World Cup cycle. Nick Tompkins and George North likewise. And then Josh Adams, Rees-Zammit, and Liam Williams likewise. So every one of the backline positions, the guy who's had the most minutes in his position across this World Cup cycle is in the squad. So there's no huge omission, a guy who clocked up 55% of the game time and has just kind of fallen off a cliff or retired or injured or whatever. those guys are all there. So that is at least pretty encouraging, even though a guy like Nick Tompkins is the first choice in his position, has only had about 30% of the game time. He is the first choice guy, but also he's not had as much game time as certainly some of the other guys have had in their positions. But yes, that is the depth chart for Wales. Like I said, there's been a bunch of depth charts already prepped up. Check them out if you want to kind of compare how they're looking at for Welsh fans. It might be an interesting one to compare with the Aussies, because theirs is also pretty messy. But yeah, you guys let us know your thoughts. How do you reckon Wales are going to go at the World Cup? Cheers as always for the support. A few people doing the buy me a beer thing recently, which I much appreciate. That link's always down in the description for anyone who's got a cheeky few bucks to buy this guy a beer. But yeah, you guys take care, and I'll talk to you guys again soon. See you later.